coming in?
You betcha.
My name is Alec Barshinsky from Helias Catholic High School, and this interview is being held at Helias. The date is November 12th, 2019. Okay, what is your last name?
My last name is Wilde,
Can you spell that, please?
W-I-L-D-E.
And then can I have your first name and your middle initial?
First name is Eric, E-R-I-C, and my middle initial is G.
Awesome. Okay. First, I would like to ask, how are you doing today?
Doing great.
Good.
A little cold outside.
Yeah, it's cold. So when and during what year were you born?
I was born in 1973, April 21st, and I was born here in Jefferson City at St. Mary's Hospital.
Awesome. Who are your parents and what were their occupations as you were growing up?
My parents are Gerald and Clara Wilde. My dad's occupation varied. We started out on a farm, and then he went to work for ABB as an assembly guy over at ABB at the power plant in Jeff City. And my mom was a nurse, and she worked at a retirement home.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
I have two younger sisters.
Okay, what were their names?
My next youngest sister is Pam, and my youngest sister is Renee.
And did any of them ever serve in the military, or were you the only one?
My sisters did not, my dad did.
Okay. How did your parents react to you joining the military?
They were very supportive. My parents were, they trusted me a lot to always make the right decisions. So whenever I decided I wanted to join the military, they were supportive of it.
How about your siblings? Did they have any reaction?
No, they were young and they were still in high school, so they didn't really care too much.
What about grandparents? Did you get any reaction from them? Or was
No,
it...
they were all very supportive of us as well.
Awesome. What education did you receive before you went into service? Like, where did you go to school?
I went to St. Elizabeth High School. It's about 35 miles south of here, and I actually joined my junior year of high school. So I had a junior equivalent education, and then went to basic training after my junior year, and went back to high school for my senior year.
So, did you have any jobs during that time in high school?
I did. I worked a variety of jobs. I was kind of a odd job guy. I did a lot of painting for people, cut a lot of grass. I worked in a what do you call it, a place where they auction livestock. I would run livestock and things like that. So I picked up jobs just for cash.
Okay. So when you joined the military, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Okay. So what age do you think you considered enlisting, like you began to consider?
I started thinking about it when I turned 16. The opportunities for me were pretty limited in high school. I could work odd jobs and make a few dollars cash here and there, but by joining at 17, I had a steady paycheck. Also got a lot of college money lined up because I knew my parents didn't make a lot of money, so I knew I was going to have to do something to help myself through college, and started making that plan around 16.
Did you ever have anyone give you advice on what to expect before you began your service?
I did. My dad was in the National Guard, and that's what I joined, so he had a lot of friends, and I got some advice from him, and a lot of his friends would also tell me the same thing. So I did have a set of mentors, I guess, that would tell me what the National Guard was like.
Okay. Was the U.S. involved in any war or altercation when you enlisted?
We weren't. The closest that we came, I enlisted in 1990, and in 1990 we started the first Persian Gulf War, but I was still not trained and too young to go to that, so and that one just didn't last very long. So there was a brief amount of time where I had enlisted but just could not go to the Persian Gulf War because of my training.
Okay. So when you enlisted, who did you leave at home? Like, did you have any pets or special friends that you...
Yeah, I had, my parents, all my friends, the people that, played on my sports teams. St. Elizabeth was a really small school, so you kind of knew everybody. Don't recall having any pets at that time that meant a lot to me. Family, friends, things like that.
So, when I think about joining the military, I feel like for me it would be really hard to start a whole new chapter in my life. Like, I'm not very good at change. Was it difficult for you to start new, basically?
It was challenging. I mean, you go into a whole new world. For me, I'd never really even left the state of Missouri. So whenever I enlisted in the military, I knew that I was going to be doing a lot more traveling. had a lot more responsibilities, you know, and after I got back, after my basic training, where most high school seniors have got every weekend to go out and have fun, do what they want to do, at least one weekend a month. I had drills, so I had to plan accordingly and not be out late and hanging out with my friends because I had responsibilities that started probably a lot sooner than some folks.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you went into the National Guard. Why did you choose that branch?
Well, I chose that because I really didn't at that time want to go full-time military. I wanted to still be able to have a career that I chose, but I knew that the National Guard would still allow me to serve. It would still provide a steady check and a plan for college, and help me to fulfill that desire to be patriotic and serve my country.
So, would you say that because your dad served in the National Guard that it had anything to do with you choosing that too?
I think it did because he explained a lot of the benefits I would get, and he had gone active duty early on in his life, and he kind of described that as being a completely different lifestyle, and I wasn't ready, I think, at that point to jump into committing to a completely different lifestyle because even like most kids in high school, I really didn't even know what I wanted to do in my career, and I didn't want to commit. So I thought that that was a good opportunity for me to also go out and learn, you know, what other things are available. The military has got a ton of job specialties available that you can choose from, and it allowed me to kind of dip my toe into the water to help point me in the right direction, which it sort of did. The military and law enforcement kind of go hand in hand, so that's where I started thinking seriously about being in law enforcement.
Okay. A lot of times we have Army recruiters and Navy recruiters and people come to our school. Did you ever have anyone come to you that may have influenced your decision?
We did, yeah. There was a local guy here that my dad was really good friends with named John Boffman. He was a local recruiter. So Dad took me to a few of his drills where John was at, and John sat me down and talked about what I could expect, asked me what kind of jobs I was interested in, and kind of pointed me in the right direction to get there.
So were you interested in any other branches, or did you know you wanted to be in the National Guard?
I knew I wanted to be in the National Guard.
Okay. So how did you get to your initial entry point?
Well, it's funny because my basic training was at Fort Leonard Wood, and the town I grew up in was about 20 minutes from there, give or take. But for me to get to Fort Leonard Wood, I had to drive from St. Elizabeth to here in Jeff City. I rode a train from Jeff City to Kansas City. I flew from Kansas City to St. Louis, and then I rode a bus from St. Louis to Fort Leonard Wood. So there was a lot of steps to get there. It took me 2 days to get to Fort Leonard Wood from my house, but that's because I had to go check in. I had to do some extra finalization of paperwork in certain areas in Kansas City, and then they wanted us in St. Louis so that we could all go together as a group.
So you don't think there was another place that might have been closer that you could have gone?
Really, at that point, it's out of your hands. Once you sign on the line, they tell you exactly where you're going to go to do your initial entry training, and they told me I was going to Fort Leonard Wood, and I just hopped on the train, and that's where I went.
So, what was your training like? Was it difficult?
It was. I remember being a little nervous about it because everybody sees those drill sergeants, you know, the videos of them yelling at you the whole time, and really all they're doing is putting a lot of stress on you to see how you react under stress. And at that time, you know, a lot of the things that I considered stressful, now that I've been through that, really aren't stressful at all. But it's a little nerve-wracking because you don't want them to single you out and you be the one they're picking on all the time. But I think it taught me some responsibility that if I did my job correctly, kept my mouth shut, kept my head low, you can succeed and not stick out and just kind of survive.
Okay. So, what do you think the most memorable part of your time in training was? What part do you remember the most?
Training. I think the most memorable time for me in training was just going to the ranges all the time. I really like shooting, and they taught me a lot of the skills to be a really good marksman. You know, a lot of the classes, and after they get you up at 4 in the morning and work you all day long, I remember it being very difficult to stay awake in some of those classes, but you didn't dare fall asleep because if you did, you know, they'd be all over you. So I think I really enjoyed the ranges. I like the obstacle courses, things like that, because I consider those fun as opposed to sitting in a classroom trying to take in the book work, things like that.
So what do you think the worst part of your training was?
I think the worst part of it was just having come from a small town where I knew everybody, was just being there and not knowing anybody, because you had to form new relationships, you had to meet new people that may have come from a different state that didn't necessarily see things the way you did. So it was an eye-opening experience, but being alone like that, it can be stressful whenever you're, used to having that core group of support people you grew up with.
Did you ever consider giving up or quitting at any time during your
No.
training?
No, never did.
What was the hardest thing for you to get used to? I know you mentioned being alone, but was there anything else that was?
I think for me at training, the hardest thing to get used to was probably just, being at the right place at the right time, going on a schedule. You know how it is in high school. You got places you gotta be, but your parents have to take you. When you're off on your own, it was me. I had to be up, dressed, ready to go at the right time. It wasn't one of those things where you ever got to sleep in on a weekend. So you basically had to grow up and take care of your business.
So you think that experience made you more responsible today?
Yeah, I think so, it definitely did, because, and I think every person in high school at some point makes a decision to become responsible and grow up, some that later. I was 17 years old and basically had to get myself from my hometown, and the first time I had ever flown was to get there, first time I had ever ridden on a train was to get there. Other people had those opportunities before, so I had to navigate not only getting there and learning the Army thing, but also just the basics of how to get there. What's it like to get into a train terminal and figure out what the next step is, being in an airport terminal, figuring out what the next step is. So had a lot thrown at me in a short amount of time, and you could either adjust and succeed or fail and not show up on time.
So would you say that joining it gave you a lot of new experiences that you'd never had before?
Yeah, a lot of new experiences.
Okay, so did you receive any specialized training?
Not immediately. I've had a lot of specialized training since then. I'm going on about 28 years in the military. I started out with the basics, just being an enlisted person, and then I made the decision at one point to become an officer. And since becoming an officer, I've gone through a lot of specialized training.
Okay. What kind of stuff does that training involve? Like, what is the difference between specialized training and basic training?
Well, everybody gets the basic stuff. Everybody gets the how to shoot, how to move, how to communicate, how to do first aid. That's the basic skills. The specialized training that I received after becoming an officer was more strategic in nature. So I got training about how to lead teams, how to make plans, how to address certain cultures, or how to address certain people whenever you're in a foreign country to help you to survive and make friends and those sort of things. So the training continues to evolve. There's a lot of training opportunities available, but if you want to just be basic and know the basics, you're not going to succeed very long in our line of work.
Okay. Are there any specific teachers, instructors, mentors that stand out from basic or specialized training?
Well, I've got some drill sergeants that I remember, but that's just because they were the tough ones. But as far as mentors, a lot of my mentors were just former bosses, because we don't just get training like classroom training whenever we go and become part of a team. People expect bosses to mentor younger officers, so I've had a lot of lieutenant colonels and colonels since I became an officer that have mentored me and said, hey, here's kind of the steps you need to hit, here's how I would approach this. So you're constantly learning in the military. My colonel on the last deployment I went on in Jordan a couple years ago was very good about that, sitting down and saying, hey, in my experience, this is what worked for me. It may not work for you, but I would suggest taking this path. So like I said, there's formal training, there's informal training, and the informal training is what really makes the impact on you whenever you got somebody that wants to see you succeed and they step in and say, here's your path to success. I would recommend taking this route.
Okay, so you mentioned that you remembered some of the most strict teachers. You remembered them more. Do you think they were the best teachers, or were there other methods that worked well?
I think that the reason I remember their names and who they were was because they instilled the most fear. You know what I mean? Because you knew that if you messed up, when you're in basic training, you know that if you mess up, these guys are gonna wear you out with push-ups, sit-ups, running, whatever. So you remember them because they were the ones you really wanted to perform for, so that it doesn't bring back pain on you. Not that they were necessarily that great, but they had a reputation for really letting you have it if you messed up.
Do you believe that during training an individual is broken and a serviceman is created?
I think so, and I think that's a strategy. They will tell you that. They, at basic training, they basically strip you of any amount of individuality you've ever had. They take everything from you that you're used to having, and they completely strip you of all that to make you a new person. It's not just coincidental either. They want trainees to know that without freedom, this is what you got. You're being told where to eat, when to eat, what to wear, how to wear it. You know, we're very fortunate that we got the freedom as a country to eat, drink, wear what we want, say what we want. But when they strip you of that at basic training, it's to show you what freedom really means, and to say that now you're being recreated in the form of a soldier. So it's not just happenstance that they do that; it's for a reason.
So do you think that a young man coming in that might be more arrogant or big-headed than another one would have a harder time adjusting to the loss of his freedoms?
They would have an incredibly hard time. The most successful people I see are the ones that are hardworking and humble and open to suggestions, open to new ideas. Because people that are set in stone and think that they know everything, they'll be the first ones that get washed out.
Okay. You mentioned that you're still, in a way, receiving training.
Mhm.
How long did basic training take in total?
Basic training for me was 8 weeks.
8 weeks.
Yeah.
And it continued throughout, well, the rest
Yeah.
of your training continued throughout.
Well, I went to basic training the summer after my junior year of high school. Then I went back to high school, and then the following summer I went to what was called Advanced Individual Training, AIT. So I decided on being a single channel radio operator. That was going to be my job when I got in. So after that I had to go to Fort Gordon, Georgia the summer after my senior year for 13 weeks of training down there to learn how to operate a radio, set up a radio, talk into the radio, and communicate for the commander.
So after training, you went back to high school, and then you went back to training to become a radio operator. What was the first assignment that you were giving after you finished all your training?
Yeah, the first assignment I got was right back here in Jefferson City at the Blue Armory, over here on Armory Drive. There was a unit there called the 35th DISCOM. It's a Division Support Command, and I was a radio operator for the commander there.
Okay. Did you have a friend group or a group of friends that you became close to while serving?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I talked about going off into a different area where you don't know anybody, people that have familiarities or have commonalities tend to stick together. I became pretty good friends at basic training with a couple of guys from Arkansas, one from Texas, because we'd all played baseball, we all like to hunt, we all like to fish, and as you navigate through that, you start seeing those people that are a lot like you, and you're just comfortable with them. Not meaning that people that were from New York City or the state of California, I didn't become friends with them, but you kind of fall into that core group of people that you're really comfortable with.
Okay. So did your service ever take you overseas? You mentioned going to Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
and that is in the Middle East, correct?
Right.
So did you ever go anywhere else?
Yeah, I've been overseas 5 times now. I've been so every year in the National Guard you do a 2-week training activity during the summer, and I've been to the country of Panama twice doing those 2-week rotations. And then in 2003, the invasion of Iraq, I got called up to deploy to Iraq. I was in Baghdad, and then in 2012, got called up again for deployment and went to Kuwait. And the most recent one in 2017, I went to Jordan and was deployed again.
Do you have any experiences or memories you'd like to share from this time?
Oh, there's tons. I mean, I remember being incredibly frightened going to the Middle East because I thought it was just going to be very hostile to everybody that was there. I was pleasantly surprised that when we got to Iraq and I was in Baghdad, that a lot of people there are more or less just like us as Americans. I mean, there were people that didn't like us and attacked us and wanted to kill us, but I was very happy to see that so many people were just normal, that really enjoyed us. I remember driving into Baghdad, and there was a parade field where there's these 2 crossed swords. that used to be reserved for Saddam Hussein and his armies to do all their marching. And I just remember that was the first place we hit in Baghdad, and we rolled down the parade field and basically were saying, we're here now. This is our house. So, yeah, but just tons of experiences. It was, some of them great, some of them not so great, but memories all the same. Kuwait, I remember about the only thing I really sticks out about Kuwait. I mean, I worked hard, worked a lot of hours, but I've never seen it get that hot anywhere. I saw one temperature gauge one day that was like 154 degrees on the flight line down there because it was all pavement, and just remember never ever experiencing that kind of heat. And then in Jordan, again, same thing. I worked very closely with foreign militaries over there, became really good friends with a lot of the people from Jordan, became good friends with people from Israel, and just it was just a totally different experience. Each one of those three was a completely different thing. The first one, I was actually at war, in battles, doing things like that. The second one in Kuwait, I was more of a coordinator and assister, sitting in the office all day. And on my third deployment, I got to work out of the U.S. Embassy about 2 days a week. So spent a lot of time in civilian clothes, spent a lot of time with embassy personnel, a lot of time with foreign militaries. So it was, each one of them was different but very rewarding.
So you weren't just a radio operator in all three of those?
Right. By the time I had gone to that, I had come back and reclassified as an officer. So my specialty now is in military intelligence. And I went, after I became an officer, qualified as an officer, went out to Fort Huachuca in Arizona for 3 months, became a military intelligence officer. So my entire career just took a 90-degree turn. I was, as an enlisted guy, you carry out orders, you do the things your officers tell you to do. When I became an officer, I had to be the guy in charge and go do some of the more high-level stuff to support the operation, the mission we were doing.
I see a lot of movies and media about war. Do you think that they're accurate, or is it a lot different when you actually?
I remember war being incredibly boring. I mean, you were always on edge, but not to take away from all this stuff about World War II and Vietnam, because I know there were huge battles where there were hundreds and hundreds of people lost in each one of those. I would say they were accurate, but a lot of the stuff you see about the war in Iraq, I didn't experience it. All of the things that I experienced were, just hit or miss attacks on you that you really didn't get a chance to fight back. Sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't. But just small, like an IED explosion would hit your vehicle, or you'd get shot at by an RPG, from a couple blocks away that you just couldn't tell where it was coming from. And I remember at night, after going to sleep, they would launch mortars at us, and you just couldn't tell where they were coming from. So there were times of chaos and panic, but you never really knew. It wasn't like you were facing an army of people that were coming over a hill to kill you. It wasn't a lot of battle, one-on-one battle.
Do you ever see any of the people that you were deployed with, any of the people that served under you or over you?
Yeah, a lot of them I still do. And like I said, having been through 3 different deployments with 3 different units, there's still a lot of those folks that are in the National Guard that you see from time to time. And even some here in Jeff City, that have been in my unit that deployed with me. You run into them all the time at football games or anywhere.
Is there a chance that you could be sent back overseas, or do you have any control of that?
Not really any control of it. There's always a chance while I'm still in that they could call me again. They try to set us up on rotations, so that you get a deployment, you have a few years off, and then they call you again. It's getting to be a pretty regular occurrence that people in the National Guard are going overseas. So just kind of waiting to see where and when the next one's coming from.
You talked about how all the explosions and stuff and always being on edge. Was there ever a time that you thought that you were going to die or were extremely close to it?
Not really, no. I mean, at that time, everybody that was attacking us really wasn't very good at what they were doing, because I was there during the invasion and the months after that. So in Iraq, it became a lot more deadly years later. It was almost like they were using us as test subjects to see how to become more lethal. So, I remember driving through neighborhoods there, and they would throw hand grenades against your Humvee, and us in a Humvee versus a hand grenade, not really that worried about it. So no, there wasn't ever a time I felt like, ooh, I'm going to die today. You always just kind of had that feeling that you just don't ever know when your time is, because there were people that were getting hit.
So can you walk us through what a typical day in your life looked like, maybe in one or two of the different tours?
In Iraq, it was work every day. It was get up. I worked the night shift, so I would sleep during the day and get up around 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon and eat something and go to work. So we worked all night long, and I was a military police officer at that time. So our job was to go out, pick up a patrol of Iraqi police, because a lot of them during the invasion had just left. They weren't going to do their job anymore. So the country of Iraq was trying to stand back up the police. So we would go pick them up, do joint patrols, and our job was just like being a police officer here in America, was just go out and take care of people's problems, prevent violence, prevent big looting, stuff like that, and just being a presence out there. We did a lot of escorts for like fuel trucks, ammunition trucks, things like that. We were there to protect those escorts, so we would get called to go do side missions to do that. But if we weren't doing that, we were patrolling with Iraqi police officers, and we were helping them to kind of set up their police stations, rebuild them, see what they needed to make them successful, because what we really wanted to do was turn over the job back to them so that we could get out of there at some point.
How were you transported from the United States to the Middle East?
Well, we always go through a pre-training sort of exercise, and we trained out in Fort Riley, Kansas for my Iraq deployment. And once we left Fort Riley, we flew right out of there straight into Kuwait. They would contract commercial airlines to transport us, so we flew on a commercial airline from Fort Riley over to Kuwait with a few stops along the way. And when we sat down in Kuwait, they put you in buses, they pull all the shades down on the windows so nobody knows you're Americans, and they take you to a little base out in the middle of the desert. And for the first couple weeks, we just kind of sat there, because when we left Fort Riley, it was about 12 degrees outside, and when we sat down in Kuwait, it was about 117 degrees outside. So we had some time of just sitting around, getting used to the weather, making sure our weapons were clean, making sure our equipment was ready to go, and then when they said it was time to go, that's when we took off in a convoy up into Iraq.
Okay, so you mentioned that you were military police and a radio operator. Well, did you have any other jobs?
Yeah, like I said, now I'm a military intelligence officer. So my job is to define what the battlefield looks like for a commander, whether it be the enemy or the terrain or the weather. I'm the one that's sitting there saying, hey, here are all the challenges that you're going to face during operations, and then it's up to the commander and the rest of the staff to decide what to do.
So your job sounds like it's pretty important.
It is, yeah. I've taken on a lot more responsibility. During my last deployment, like I said, I was working out of the embassy a couple days a week, and most embassies overseas have got an ambassador and a deputy chief of mission, which is the guy underneath him, and I was briefing that guy twice a week on what we thought was going on in Syria, because we were there during the ISIS fight, and in Jordan we were trying to help them defend their borders against spillover from Syria into Jordan. So I was helping brief some pretty high-level folks on what we were seeing from the military intelligence standpoint.
So you would say that the job you're doing now is more difficult than what you started with?
It's just different. It's a different level of difficult. I mean, physically, Iraq was more difficult because we were sleeping on the ground, no showers. You know, it was physically difficult. I'd say it's more mentally difficult right now, because you want to make sure and give the best information you can to the people that are making decisions with it. So you got to be very vigilant. I do a lot of reading. I got a good feel for how I think a certain group or a certain enemy is going to fight, and I've got to be able to back that up with facts, so that people can make great decisions.
Do you like this job more or less than what you were doing before?
I think I like this one more just because I'm getting older. I mean, my days of sleeping on the ground and being in patrols, that's kind of a young guy's game. I could still do it if I wanted to, but I get a lot more satisfaction, I think, out of connecting the pieces of the puzzle for those people that need the information.
What do you believe is the most important thing that you did or achieved during your time of service?
I think one of the biggest things that I've achieved so far was that when I was in Iraq, I had a team of people that worked under me and for me, and that I got all those guys home safe. You know, made good decisions on the ground, because you think about it, they turned a bunch of 20-something kids loose in 2 Humvees as a team and said, go out into Baghdad and keep order. You know, some kids could go out there and just be completely boneheaded and get yourselves killed or not do their job. We would go out on our job every day, pushed them to go out there to be safe, made the right decisions, and everybody came home safe. As far as the other 2 deployments, I think I've just always been a good supporter to those higher level folks that really needed good information, and was able to get into a lot of good dialogue with people to say, I'm seeing it this way, what do you think? Because nobody knows everything. It's more about creating dialogue and making sure everybody has a view of how things are going, so that the right decisions can be made.
So when you commanded your group in Iraq, how old were you?
I was 28 years old.
And you were in charge of a bunch of other 20-year-olds?
I was in charge of, well, my truck, I had 3 people. So I had a driver and then a gunner up top, and then the other truck had 3 people as well. So we had 6 of us total that were out on patrol. We always rolled with 2 trucks, and it was up to me. Where do we go? What are we going to do? And how are we going to address this issue? And but yeah, most of them were in their early 20s.
Okay, so now you're back at Jeff City. So do you have any wife and children?
I do. I've got a wife named Adrian. I've got a son named Gage, who's a student here at Elias. My daughter Alex is in 8th grade. She'll be here at Elias next year. And then there's Bodie. He's 8 years old, and he's at St. Francis Xavier, and I'm sure he'll be here someday too.
How have your experience in the military affected your life other than responsibility?
I think my service is, I feel bad about it sometimes, but it's really taken me away from a lot of the stuff that I would like to enjoy with my kids. 3 deployments, 2 of those, my Gage was born on the day I got home from my first deployment, so really nobody had to suffer my absence except for Adrian, my wife, but the other 2 follow-on deployments, the kids, I missed out on ball games, couldn't be there to help them with homework, just those experiences. So, but I look at it like this: I'm not the only one. Thousands and thousands of people had the same issue. But that's the one thing to me is just there's times I really wish I could have been around with the kids more and done things, gone hunting, gone fishing. While I've got, and it continues to this day. I got drill weekends where Gage is playing football, and I got to miss a football game because I have drill, that sort of thing. So,
what are some lessons or themes that serving in the military has taught you?
I think it's that if you work hard and do the right thing, anybody can be successful in the military. It's a very structured organization, and they train you to excel. They train you to succeed. They don't train you to fail. So even if you're a little bit challenged in maybe how you learn or anything like that, if you get into the military and you work hard and do the right thing, you're going to be successful, and you can be as successful as you want to be. Other than that,